Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fireside with Fathers. Happy Easter. Our Lord is risen, and happy Divine Mercy Sunday as well, which we celebrated yesterday. Huge abundance of graces in life, and an injection of the Spirit. It's something else to live in these times we're living in, especially as a Catholic. And I think it's the best times, really, to be alive, in the sense of fully alive, the life of grace in us, and to be fighting the good fight. And as always, when we do have Father Jeff on, it is to kind of teach us to be shrewd, to be prudent, to know really where things are coming and where they're going, just so that we can have a kind of like a fine-tuned ear when it comes to Caesar and in society, and who we really listen to. That is all like stuff that comes out usually when we're with you, Father Jeff, so it is highly appreciated. And people do send in comments. They're appreciative that it's a novelty for them to see a Catholic priest coming from this, like a political science background, and just giving us keys interpretation. So I'm sure people pray for you. So if you aren't praying for Father Jeff, pray for him. And everything that he's giving us for nourishment is we pay back, obviously, with our gratitude and our prayers. So thanks, Father.
You're welcome.
That being said, we said the last time that we were going to have like a bit of a Q&A. So there was questions that people had in the comments, and other ones that they've been asking kind of randomly. So we just kind of put some of them together, and who knows where it can go from here. But it's just basically kind of just questions that you guys have had, and Father Jeff kind of picking through them. There's a little list here that we have. We can start with, I don't know if this is something in the States, but I was recently told to hold on to our pasta. So we usually do have a good supply of pasta, just because it's pasta's good. But we were told to, have a bit more pasta, and the bags of rice that we received in the first lockdown, we still have. We were donated massive bags of rice. So people are saying now is the moment. This is when it's all going down. Now you need your pasta. You need to store up your food. So I think it has to do with just the economic crash, or economic, where we're going with that. Maybe we could start with that one, Father Jeff. What's going on? We're in the verge of a crisis, or what?
Well, it does. Everyone seems. We have to remember that there's a history of this. Everyone, for those of us who were alive or around at the end of the 1990s, there were people saying at that time as well, it's good to have like a 6-month supply of food or a 9-month supply of food. It's good to have access to a source of water. It's good that you never know what can happen, because the whole thing of approaching the year 2000 was the Y2K virus, right? Was the computer virus going to upset the world in some way? And I suppose there was obviously a possibility of that. And it seems to me this is one of those areas where, from a moral standpoint, just thinking of a father and mother of a family, I was just listening to Robert Barnes the other day say that he thinks obviously things could get dicey. He's someone who's he's a little bit closer to the economic and political levers of power than I am. And he was just introducing some of his comments by saying, hey, if you were Jewish in 1929 in Germany, would you probably be saying everything is going well, right? I got no reason to fear. I got no reason to leave. I got no reason to think about, my future, the security of my future and whatnot. Everything seems pretty good. There were signs in Weimar Germany, right, that a Jewish person in 1929 might have reason to move to the countryside or move to another country. And there were obviously Jewish people who did that. So I think there's enough signs to where it would make sense.
What would be some of those signs you'd say?
I think just the overall situation of the world that I would just begin with, right? The world is more or less controlled. I wouldn't say, obviously nations are a part of the control mechanisms of the world, nations and states. But you also have this large superclass of the super wealthy, the rich, what we usually associate with the World Economic Forum, though I wouldn't leave it just to the World Economic Forum. But they speak openly about every 80 years or so, there needs to be some sort of a reset of the economic, of the political systems. And you can see that those who are very adept at commenting on the economy, I would point to George Gammon, I would point to Jeff Snyder. I would say if you look at what they're saying, they seem to be these two, for example, seem to be pretty predictive about like what might happen next. Another person I look at is Tom Luongo. And again, they seem to be predictive. So what they're saying is that, well, we're in store for a lot of economic uncertainty, a lot of economic fluctuation. And if that's the case, it's good to have, again, I don't think everyone has different means, everyone has different capacities, but it is good to have a little bit of a sense of, well, just to think through, well, again, I wouldn't give into any kind of excessive fear, but just to think through, could I survive for a week? Could I, for 6 weeks, what would we do if everything broke down for 6 weeks? If all the supply chains got cut? Because just economically, like for example, what Jeff Snyder is saying, those who are able to get money into the system, they've been getting into the system in such a way that at some point there's going to have to be a correction, right? Either a large recession or some sort of a depression, right? The other thing I think that the other sign that I would just say is that we're in a moment of political chaos, right? We're in a moment where reading chapters 17 to 19 of the book of the Apocalypse can actually be helpful. And I don't mean that in the sense of like we're close to the end of time. I just mean that we're in a moment where the empire of Babylon is falling apart. Babylon is depicted in chapters 17 to 19 of the Apocalypse as the empire that's trying to control all of the world. And there's a moment where Babylon falls apart. And all the merchants of the world, they rejoice and they also lament at the moment that Babylon falls apart. But they also, what do they start to do? They start to set up a different system of networks, a different network in which they're going to operate. So on the one hand, I would say, yes, the economic forces and institutions that govern the world, that even oversee nations and nation states, many of them are attached to the United States, but it's not just from the United States. But they're saying we're going to try to carry out some sort of a great reset. We're going to try to create a little bit of chaos in these next 10 years so that we can set the world according to our view of things, our vision of things. And I don't think that they have any deep notion of the truth, so they tend to operate according to the position of Thrasymachus from the ancient world, that truth is the opinion of the powerful. But I think they've been openly saying that they're going to try to reset the world in some way. Secondly, then you got the economic system. Third, you have, well, the fact that for many years, the United States was hegemon of the world. That's a term that some use. I'm saying the United States is more like Babylon, but there's gonna that can't last forever. And of course, the United States has said that she's going to try to, at least the foreign policy elites of the United States, many of whom are allied with this economic superstructure that I've been talking about. Many of the leaders of the United States, their explicit foreign policy is to try to maintain American supremacy in the world. Sometimes the term is called full spectrum dominance. And they do not want to see a world that becomes what's the term that's used is the multipolar world, or a world of a balance of powers, where the larger nations, where really all nations have some say, though larger nations are always going to have a little bit more say than smaller nations whenever you have a multipolar or a balanced system like that, a balance of powers type system. And there's also a question of this, what should govern the international system? Should it be principles and laws, or should it be the rules determined by the most powerful nation, right? Does the most powerful nation, that is the United States, and not just, I don't want to say the United States as a whole, but does the United States American foreign policy establishment, do they play the role of Thrasymachus, and do they set the rules, or do they set what is true for the entire world and back it up by force? And I think there is a question right now of, will this multipolar system emerge naturally? Will it be allowed to emerge naturally? Or will it have to be asserted by some sort of use of power? And it seems like the United States is using power to prevent that multipolar world from emerging, to slow it down, to put roadblocks in the way, in order to keep its own position. So
well,
that's
we've been talking about that for a while now.
Pardon?
You were talking. I mean, we've been talking.
Oh yeah.
Yourself, just even going back, the first episodes we were doing, just this whole idea of bordering threats to this hegemony and trying to break them up. You mentioned Syria. You mentioned, I mean, Poland was there as well when we were saying that we had our military bases there. Now this whole conflict, what's going on in the Ukraine. Do you think, I don't know, this could be bouncing back and forth. This was also another one of the questions that kind of ties into what we're talking about. And then we'll get back. We'll just answer the question if we should store food or not. But is like America right now, are they even in a position to have much influence? Like, I mean, I'm just thinking of the way it seems like the interior turmoil, the split, the elections. Like, how do we have, like, what's the, like, panning out right now, the next year and a half, 2 years? Like, are we kind of just crumbling and just lashing out last attempt, or would you see it even as an influence?
Well, certainly there's a lot of internal tension, but if you study the history of empires, a lot of the leadership in our empire is like the leadership of late empires, which is corrupt and very self-interested. And one of the difficulties of empires is that the system can operate, in a way, the system can operate long after the leadership is capable of using it to some good effect. So even if there is a lot of internal turmoil because of, well, political factionalism, because various factions are trying to preserve their part of the system, their control of their part of the system, even if there is a lot of internal turmoil, the system can still project itself externally in a, not as well as it used to, but it can still project itself. It can still cause a lot of damage. The United States is still a nuclear power, right? There's still the risk of the United States doing a lot of damage, a lot of harm in the world, and we still have the resources to meddle, right? We have the resources to meddle in the Ukraine. We have the resources to start meddling like what's happening in Taiwan. You can see already now in Taiwan emerging something like what began to emerge in Ukraine beginning in 2000, 2005, 2006, which is again, it's a classic sign of America trying to prevent the emergence of this multipolar world. And yeah, we do have even with all the internal turmoil in the United States, the system still has the power to project itself in a very aggressive way throughout the world. For example, we've caused a lot of turmoil in the Ukraine, but we haven't done as much as we could have, right? Things could still be a lot worse, you might say. We still have a lot more resources to make things worse, though we could move to China now as well, China and Taiwan, well, as raising tensions there. So that's part of what it means to be Babylon. On the one hand, you do have this great power, right? On the other hand, as you get towards the end of an empire, well, the empire can act in a way that's kind of like a drunkard, right? It can flail around, and it can actually do a lot of damage until it's stopped.
Well, it's a powerful drunkard as well. He's got things in his hands.
Yeah.
He's got broken bottles, and like he
Yeah.
can do a lot of damage. I'm obviously the States is what it is, and I think we mentioned before, but we wouldn't even be properly ready for, as far as like our nuclear fallout in Russia's, and like if we were to enter into that game, it would be, I'd say, more dangerous for us as far as being prepared. Please God, I think that's what we all usually pray for. That we don't enter into that. What do, as far as just keeping it up on the empire, this was another question that people had, what does woke mean? What do ideologies have to do in all of this? Because you're starting to see it in Ukraine as well, all of a sudden, this whole ideology is such an important theme. As far as you're just sticking with the empire and influence and stuff, what do ideologies and wokeism, what does that have to do with anything right now, or why is that there?
Well, I think a lot of these, I think if you understand Michel Foucault, I think if you understand the way the business, let's just call it the deep state for the sake of our conversation, because that's the concept that many are coming to understand a lot better now. But the deep state is a kind of conglomeration of business interests, military interests, and political interests that are essentially trying, the deep state is essentially trying to take over the operating system of the United States, if it doesn't have it already. If it has it already, it's trying to keep it and not let the political process, political institutions control it. Harry Truman, when he founded the CIA, he felt that some sort of deep state, some sort of unelected, unaccountable part of the government could emerge and control the other branches of government, and that would be a great danger of democratic states, because if you don't have accountability to the people through elections, well, you don't really have a republic anymore. You don't really have a democracy anymore, and we can say that in the sense that the Catechism of the Catholic Social Teaching reminds us that it seems like in the modern world, the form of government that most often is going to guide states is going to be some sort of democratic form of government, or some sort of government that's accountable to popular vote. And if you have a deep state, you don't have that. So you don't have one of the basic requirements for justice in a political system. You don't have a basis for solidarity. In other words, the institutions living a kind of with the common interest of the people, trying to build up the common good. You have a lack of respect for subsidiarity, the respect of each political institution operating according to how it should operate. So, that's a little bit, I just want to say that to say a little bit by what authority can we comment on these things? I think it's by that authority. But the deep state, essentially, why would they want the woke ideology, right? And the woke ideology would be some sort of promotion of identity politics. And oftentimes it's identity of politics according to what are accidental characteristics of human nature. Why would they want this? Well, I think there's two things. One thing is how they promote it, and then why they want it. How has it been promoted? If you look at the career of how the ideology, or how the philosophy of Michel Foucault was transformed into an ideology, I think you get one of the keys of this. And actually, you can point to Notre Dame in the 1980s, the University of Notre Dame in the 1980s, as a place where this starts to get going. So Michel Foucault, he's a French philosopher who his basic ideas are, he makes some interesting insights, but his basic ideas are that there are these centers of power, right? And opposed to the centers of power, there's the periphery. And the periphery is always somehow being oppressed, or somehow being oppressed or abused or mistreated. The periphery is oftentimes defined as deviant. And so Foucault, he arises in the existentialist circles in France in the 1950s and 60s. And in the early 1970s, he and his followers, they basically are able to replace Jean-Paul Sartre with Michel Foucault at the head of the existentialist movement. And essentially, and then in the dynamic that was going on in the left of France in the late 60s and early 1970s, Jean-Paul Sartre and the existentialists, they happened to also be communists or Marxists, right? But they were arguing, we need economic justice for the people, and we also need sexual liberation. And when Foucault and those who were promoting him basically take over the existentialist movement in France in the early 1970s, they basically say, we need sexual liberation for the people, and you don't really need to argue too much for economic justice for the people. So the kind of the deal, you might say, that Foucault made with the deep state, the deal that he made with the military, with the economic establishment, is that we won't criticize your economic policies so long as you give us sexual freedom. So long as you give us the capacity to identify ourselves according to whatever our imagination might suggest to us, allowing us, each person, to create his own existence, create his own essence. So it's pretty interesting because Foucault really didn't get much of a following in the United States, even up until his death. He was brought to Berkeley, where he died. Though it's interesting, in the last years of his life, he was giving lectures at Berkeley on libertarian economics. But if you understand what he did in France in the early 1970s, you understand why he would give lectures on libertarian economics leading up to his death. By the way, as an aside, the founder of the Church of Satan, Antoine LaVey, in the United States, he considered himself a libertarian. He considered himself a conservative libertarian, but maybe that's a discussion for another day. Well, in the early 1980s at Notre Dame, in the early 1980s, and we know this now, actually we know this now not just through alternative sources, but we know this now even in respectable academic journals. In the early 1980s, the CIA began getting money from foundations. I don't know off the top of my head remember which foundations, but it's George Soros-like foundations, foundations run by the rich and the powerful. But the CIA began getting money and then giving money in turn to universities to promote the translation of Foucault's writings into English, and also the writings of the cultural communist Antonio Gramsci. And there was a professor at Notre Dame who oversaw almost all of the translations of Gramsci's writings and also helped to promote and expand the interest in Michel Foucault and his ideas throughout the American intellectual establishment. That professor's name was Joe Buttigieg. He was an ex-priest who, I don't know if he died a Catholic or not actually, but he was an ex-priest. And he was certainly a leader of the progressive left at the University of Notre Dame. But I think what you see happening in the woke movement is that what it takes from Foucault and then also from Gramsci is that you have to take over the cultural institutions, right? That's Gramsci's idea. Like, you got to march through the institutions and take them over to promote your ideology, right? So the woke movement has not been a grassroots movement. It's complete top down, right? And the reason it's complete top down and the reason it's useful to the deep state is that the woke ideology takes anybody who comes up with, we all have desires, right? We can all be tempted according to various desires that we might have, right? Well, what is the woke ideology? You have some desire. Well, you have some desire when you're 7 or 8 years old. Mom, why can't I have Why can't I have a tank and a gun like the boys do? Why do I have to have Barbie dolls, right? That's a little desire. Well, what if I can take a philosophy and I can turn that desire into an ideology, and I can convince you, or I can convince your parents to tell you, yeah, that little desire that you have, that's your identity, right? And then if I can also then come up with 70 or 80 or 90 or 100 or 150 or 200 different desires of that kind, I can create hundreds of identity groups that keep people warring against each other. Right? So I think for the deep state, I think for the elite, for the rich, for the powerful, an ideology like the woke movement, which convinces people to get really worked up over an identity, to make them think, I'm the periphery, and me, the periphery identitarian, I got a war against some sort of central beast, right? That's preventing me from acting, or that's keeping me in the periphery, that's keeping me from acting on my desire, the desire that forms my identity. And Foucault was very adept by the end of his life at never identifying the true power of the true center of power. That is what I'm talking about now, like the deep state. He was very good at also kind of, and his disciples are very good at directing their animus against the Catholic Church, somehow portraying the Catholic Church as that center of power, right? That's potentially oppressing everybody. I think another feature then of the woke movement, and I just want to say this one last thing before the next question, is that it is a top-down movement, right? And the reason it's a top-down movement, and I think this is also part of the insidious nature of it. If it were just like trying to form identity groups, okay, fine. But I think part of the insidiousness of it is that it's anti-life and anti-family, right? And so there is this among the American elites, there is this irrational eugenics population control mentality that somehow having children, somehow the family is somehow bad and it needs to be discouraged, right? And why is it bad? It needs to be discouraged because we, the few, we always fear the many from taking our money and our power and our position away from us. And if we have a guilty conscience because we've done unjust things to gain our position, we also fear our injustice being exposed and having to pay the penalty for our injustice. So the woke movement is a convenient trope to, it's not just a trope, but it's a convenient ideology for basically convincing people to not live in a way that will make them happy. And also to convincing people that their real source of, the real problems that they have in their life are the result of some sort of false explanation.
It makes me think of the Gospel of St. John when he refers to the world. I think it's in the 15th chapter, I'm not sure, but when he's talking first about us being united to the vine and what that all is, it's like where we receive life. And then he goes into our attitude to the world and what the world's going to be trying to do. And I mean, it's always kind of been there, like the world in the sense of, under the prince of this world and evil. But ideologies, I mean, we see it more on a ground level because we work in high schools. That's just like our main thing. And I'm always just kind of like flipping through textbooks, like while we're doing something, whatever. I just kind of like just get through the textbooks or whatever. And it's just it's intense, like how militant it is, and like because what authors they get in, who's writing the books, right, where it's coming from. And then when you go to the universities, it's like even worse. But it seems like it's all. What you mentioned was very interesting of like the central power, like they're instead of like going after that, like, what the real central deep state power is, they're kind of creating a different central power enemy, which usually comes across as, if you think about it, I know the logos. So it's like going back to this fight against the light and the darkness, right. Christ and the world.
The guilty conscience ultimately doesn't want to be reminded of the truth. So it's going to identify as an object of hatred anything that reminds it of the truth of the truth of morality.
Yeah, and I think that's been age old. So just kind of maybe this could be a good little entrance into the church. I mean, like I don't know where you'd go if you were to talk about like, you know, the German bishops. I mean, people have been asking about that. What's going on? Is this a threat? Is this something it's a good thing? Like, because it's kind of coming to light, and it's better that it comes to light so we can kind of just separate. But I mean, I'd just be probably like someone who's at home right now, and it's been very informative, you know, like what we've been talking about, just seeing a bit of society. And now we enter a bit into the church. People who are in the church, we're always asking people to, you know, build the domestic church in their home and really work hard on that first of all. Yeah. But I don't know, what would your comments be there of like, you know, the situation we're in right now? Everything we just described as a bit of a background, and like the church, right, the situation.
I would just say the problems in the German church they go back to the 1820s. Some scholars might push it even further back than the 1820s. But I think, you know, there is this tendency after the French Revolution, and you can see it also after the Second World War. Maybe we're in parallel moments, right? That after the French Revolution, there is this great sense among some of the leaders, some of the intellectuals in Europe, that a great sense of failure. And I think after the Second World War, there's also a great sense of failure among the Germans, right? They lost the war. There's always this tendency to think if you lose the war, you must also be losing the favor of God. That's a tendency that goes back to the Old Testament. And when you feel that you've lost the favor of God, what do you do at that moment? Well, you say, well, who won the war? That whoever won the war must have the favor of God, and therefore I should follow the mentality of those who won the war. And in the 1820s and 1830s in Germany and in most of Europe, there was this kind of back and forth. Do we follow Napoleon, the Napoleonic system? Will that eventually emerge no matter what? Or do we trust the English and the English system? Will that eventually emerge no matter what? I think in the debates that took place in Germany in the 19th century, there was the first group of people that won were people that basically said something to the effect of, well, we got to redo the whole faith. We got to follow, no matter who won the war, there are these modern ideologies in the Enlightenment that's the real truth at this point, and we somehow got to follow that. I think in Germany in the 19th century, that debate eventually got resolved in the favor of authors like Matthias Schieben, those who gave rise to Catholic social teaching in the Catholic Church, von Ketteler, eventually after him. I'm blanking now on who came after von Ketteler. But anyway, these were giants. Oh, Heinrich Pesch. Heinrich Pesch was the scholar who really helped to give shape to a lot of German economic social teaching, Catholic social teaching, and helped to shape papal encyclicals from the 1870s to the 1930s in Catholic social teaching, and beyond, actually, right? So by the end of the 19th century, there was this moniker, Germany teaches the church, right? That the Germans had engaged in this debate by not giving into modern Enlightenment naturalism, addressing the problems of the time in both in the life of piety, but also in more of a social measures. And there were many heroic figures in Germany in the 19th century that, for example, stood up to Bismarck during the Kulturkampf, and eventually got Bismarck to negotiate an end to the Kulturkampf. So I think you have a parallel system that's being set up after the Second World War. After the Second World War, though, the United States, right, the American elites, I don't want to say the American people, but the American elites are the ones who are determining what Germans can think, how they can act, what they can do, right? It's the Americans that first try to starve Germany to death. The Morgenthau Plan, which was implemented before the Marshall Plan, right? But the Morgenthau Plan was intended to deindustrialize Germany and then essentially to reduce Germany into a nation of peasants. The Morgenthau Plan was seen as being excessive vengeance. And so eventually the American elites replaced the Morgenthau Plan with the Marshall Plan, and Germany's still living under the effects of the Marshall Plan. But I think one of the biggest unacknowledged effects of the Marshall Plan is that German culture got determined, especially publications and whatnot. It got determined by American elites. So, for example, it was the American elites that began flooding Germany in the 1950s and 1960s with pornography. It was the American elites. I mean, there were certain elites in America and Germany that were working together to undo the equivalent of what we call in the United States the Hollywood Production Code. In other words, I think there are many Germans themselves. They are not aware of the extent to which they have been subject to American psychological warfare. And part of that psychological warfare has been to implement the sexual revolution in the German church. And I think what we're seeing with the crisis that you're seeing in the German church, it's a twofold crisis. On the one hand, it's a crisis because it's an inability to identify the cause of the sexual revolution as it got implemented in Germany. And then secondly, there's always this tendency throughout the history of the church, right? There's always this tendency of, if we can just appease the rich and the powerful, right? If we can just appease the rich and the powerful, they won't persecute us. And if they don't persecute us, we'll be able to spread the gospels, right? And I think that's what's happening with the Synod on Synodality. The German church has become kind of obeisant to the German state. The German state is a vassal state of the American Empire. And the American Empire and the German state, they're both kind of very much under the influence of the World Economic Forum type people. And they're trying to basically change. I mean, the United States began in the 1950s programs to try to change the way the Catholic Church ran itself, right? In the interest of making the Catholic Church more docile to the opinion of the powerful, whoever the powerful happened to be in a given moment. And so I think you see the Germans capitulating to that. But one of the reasons they're capitulating to that is that they themselves, I think, are ignorant of the forces that are at work in their own lives.
Yeah.
And in their country.
That's very interesting. I love how you always go back and you always get the roots of it. I was in South America and I had a bishop there. I don't know, he was kind of giving his point of view on the whole thing. I mean, in South America and also in Africa as well, you're seeing like these massive churches being built, which is usually money from these foundations, what they're usually coming from Germany, but they're unbelievable. Like they built some really like proper like, and so he was saying a lot of the influence as well would be an economic thing as well, even I don't know if it had to do with all these lawsuits that the church has been hit with abuse scandals and whatnot, and they were kind of relying on the German church bailing them out because of the whole system that they have. And then again, Catholics leaving because it was a bit more acceptable, the Protestant, so their tax money was going more to the Protestant when it came to like getting their union blessed or, getting into researching if women can be priests. I don't know, is that like at the end of the day, was it an economic thing as well that was kind of like influencing?
I'm sure that economic thing in this moment is playing a part, right? I'm sure that in a given moment, the economic, I'm aware of all the economic reasons you just gave. I'm also aware of them. I'd be willing to say they help give the German bishops a kind of importance or a weight that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise.
If they didn't, yeah.
Right? But I think also the German bishops have become the way they are, I think, because of some of these other reasons. Yeah. They've gained an influence maybe in the world beyond their numbers, beyond what their numbers merit, certainly beyond what their ideas merit, because their ideas are just going to spell out the end of Christianity. Anywhere those ideas get adopted, the churches that adopt them die. Right? It's a formula of death. It's not a formula of life.
Yeah. Just being on the street here as well, like I think people would be asking, how come there's no I don't know, like maybe a correction or something being thrown. I know there have been in the past, but what do you think, like how that should work as far as like, should something be said, or is that a tricky? That's a
Well, the
tricky
thing
one.
is, right? I mean, how can one of the problems is that you're dealing. We've talked about this issue so much, right? That you're dealing with a propaganda apparatus. So on the one hand, you're not aware of the propaganda apparatus and how it is influencing you. On the other hand, you feel a great. I think that part of the problem too is that church leaders tend to give, I think, excessive weight to the propaganda apparatus. I think many normal people have separated themselves. That's why we have the emergence of the alt news. That's why you have your YouTube channel, right? That many people have separated themselves from relying on the traditional sources of news and information and opinion. They no longer find them trustworthy. And one of the problems, I think, is that many in positions of leadership, not just in religious circles, but even in businesses and even sports teams, they give too much weight. They give too much mental weight. It's just it's too big a part of their mind or of their heart to the traditional forms of news and information, which have increasingly proven themselves to be untrustworthy. And in fact, we're seeing now in the United States, it's increasingly obvious, it's becoming public and well known that they're nothing more than organs of propaganda for the state. The way that we used to typify totalitarian societies back in the 1980s when I was growing up, that we don't really have a free press, but it seems to me that those who are in leadership positions, since they're of a different generation, they're of the generation that finds these sources of polite opinion, respectable opinion, whether it's the media or hanging out in WEF circles or getting in this club or that club or whatever other institution is part of, makes you acceptable in the EU, whatever that might be, right? They give that way more weight than they probably should. Now, I'm also perfectly willing to admit that it could be the case that they might be under some, this is where economic pressure can also come into play, because church institutions are probably always a little bit short on money. And if you realize I'm getting money from a certain source and I say something against that source or critical of that source, the spigot might run dry and I might not be able to repair the roofs on my churches or other things. I may have to shut down some schools or shut down some more churches, parishes in my diocese. So you can see how the influence of money can weigh on the decision making of someone in power.
Yeah.
I don't think it's decisive. I would say though that at some point the people respond. At some point, as we start to become a little bit more savvy ourselves, and we figure out, well, how can I speak directly with my people? Right? Technology is shifting from year to year, so it's hard for me to say, use this technology, use that technology. It seems to shift, right? But I think as we remain committed to speaking the gospel and speaking to our people will spread the light of the gospel to others. And to some degree, we do have to be keen on adopting these strategies that go around the mechanisms of control. That you're not gonna persuade the rich, and you're not gonna, you bishops of Germany, you have no credibility with Der Spiegel at this point. So by trying to ingratiate yourself to Der Spiegel, it's just not going to work. And so what you and I can do is that we can obviously speak, and also I think part of being a parent and part of what we do is that we help people. One of our aspects of educators, it goes back to the ancient world, but it is to help people understand what's forming my mind. Where am I getting the concepts of my mind from? Who has given them to me, right? Why am I thinking what I'm thinking? Where have I, and then the people that have put this in my mind Are they trustworthy? I think Gordon Barnes has this great book, How Do We Know What We Know? I highly recommend it. And the book is a dialogue between three or four college students about topics that are very relevant to our day. He wrote the book in the last 2 or 3 years. And again, I'm not saying it's the last word, but one thing I like about the book is that one of the central concepts he gets down to is, okay, when I start thinking about what do I have in my mind, can I answer the question, where did that come from? And the source that it came from, is that source trustworthy? Right? That's one, because we all rely on some witness, on somebody else has said something, somebody else has told us something. But it's good that we start asking questions like, is that source trustworthy? And what makes a source trustworthy versus untrustworthy? And like one thing that makes a source untrustworthy is when you can say that there's a concern about money that would distort the judgment of the person.
That reminds me of when you were just saying that when people are worried about the funds or the benefactors upsetting them. I think it was in St. Thomas Aquinas. It was Chesterton's biography of him. I think there's a scene he talks about St. Dominic when he goes to Rome, and he sees he's getting a tour of the Vatican Gardens, and the Pope's showing him everything, and the Pope says to St. Dominic, "I don't think Peter can say anymore that we don't have gold or silver." And Dominic responds, "Neither can he say get up and walk." Kind of just saying like, the connection there, like if we do take that route of the church, well, like this is really important, like to the maintenance, and you slowly start not relying on the Spirit and the Lord. I think it's all of us. We all have the temptation and the tendency to kind of like appeal to certain,
by the way,
goodwill.
The American Catholic Bishops' Conference has just come out with a great letter. I mean, it's a great letter for starting the discussion on the gender ideology. So we do have examples of leadership that are, maybe it's modest, but it's something, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the gender ideology letter of the Catholic bishops, I think it's good. I think it's a good letter, right?
Well, I'll have to check that.
At least it's saying, well, it's something you could give to somebody and say, hey, let's talk about this. Obviously, they don't go into a lot of the historical background. I think the Polish bishops also wrote a very good letter on the gender ideology. That, from my understanding of things, it was kind of influenced by Dr. E. Michael Jones's writings, Libido Domandi.
Wow. So this actually brings us really into this is flowing nicely. It's actually all the questions really that we had kind of wanted to get, because you're saying about like, well, where's that thought coming from? Is that reliable? I've had a lot of people ask me about the Daily Wire, because it's getting big. And, I think especially in this country, people would be kind of like a breath of fresh air to see something. Like in this country, it really is just one source.
Yeah.
So when they're hearing that, like, right-wing, whatever, what's your take on the Daily Wire? Like how can I answer people there? Is like, they're asking me, is like the Daily Wire, like, is that, is it clean or what's going on?
Is it trustworthy?
Is it trustworthy? Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say about the Daily Wire is that I think overall, obviously, they've kind of they've made their entree into political discourse by being critical of the woke culture, right, and its excesses. And I would say, though, that their trustworthiness stops there. And all you got to do is you got to look at, where are they getting their money from? Who founded the Daily Wire? Who funds the Daily Wire? And it's a bunch of people. It's a wealthy family in Texas that started their own religion, and it's some sort of I forget exactly what they call themselves, but it's some sort of like Judaic, like Judaic Christianity. It's something like that, and they're super pro-Israel. They're super to me very suspicious deep state actors. And so again, you always got to be careful. Like even Jordan Peterson, like he comes out with statements. He's come out with a number of statements in the last couple of weeks that are that I would say is just no bueno, right? That he doesn't understand the principles of Catholic morality. He doesn't understand that we each have a human nature. I thought his speech at Ephesus was terrible. He says God created, Logos created the world out of something. Well, wait a second. God creates the world ex nihilo. And so I think that the Daily Wire also it's going to run into this problem of, if you look at who they're taking their money from, they're going to be there's a typical thing that I've seen happening from the time I was a kid, right? Where there's certain deep state actors. They're more than happy to join up with religious people in being critical of woke culture, let's say. But when it comes to then deviating from certain deep state activities which are also unjust, in the realm of war, in the realm of economics being the two big ones, they'll lead you astray, right? So it's like they're entering, like if the leftist Foucault problem is that they use an ideology to get you to follow one of your passions and become a slave to it, because a man has as many masters as he has vices. On the right side of the deep state equation, the way that they'll usually get good people is they'll say, well, we agree with you on some things, the excesses of like the woke culture, and they'll suck you into their movement, and then they'll try to influence you to come over to their side in determining what the truth is, but it's just their opinion, and it really has to do with things that are really unjust in the realm of economics and of war. So for me, the Daily Wire is not fully trustworthy.
That's a great answer. Thank you. And I mean, if you were to see somebody who was covering all those bases, they probably wouldn't have heard of them. Like, I mean, if they were going after, those big issues, it would just be hard to get any platform. You know, it's unbelievable. But look, I mean, this is all going to self-destruct. There's the chaos can only go so far when you're building on chaos. I think they're even seeing within its own like woke movement, LGBTQ plus, they're even going to start attacking each other. It's just, it's a divided thing, like, so maybe you can end on some words there on, we just celebrated the resurrection. We had a great Mercy Sunday yesterday as well. Very good confessions, beautiful little service there. But maybe you can kind of just tie it up there and end with some thoughts there on the times we're living now liturgically.
I was reading some letters that St. Josemaria wrote in 1973. And he starts those letters out by saying, when you look out in the world and in the church, right, things don't look so good, right? And he says many things that we could say right now, right? It seems like there's a lot of chaos going on. Many people are abandoning the moral life. Many people are adopting lifestyles which are not in conformity with the Christian lifestyle. Within the church itself, it seems like there's many leaders and also many below the leadership that are either they're cynical, indifferent, or they don't believe. They don't believe in the sacraments anymore. They don't believe in the Catholic moral teaching anymore. And St. Josemaria says that's going to lead to disaster. We know it. We know it's going to lead to disaster. It always does. And in some sense, what we're seeing now is the fruit of that betrayal in the 1970s. And obviously, we're seeing that it's still, right, some of the bad fruit is lingering. But there's a number of things that we see that are good. I think, for example, the use of the sacrament of confession. In my own lifetime, I've seen it, but I've mostly been at universities. So my picture into this is being at universities with students, 18 to 25. The use of confession has gone from what I could see as being almost zero, right, to pretty much everybody at least does the Easter duty, right? Who, if they say they're practicing, like if I say I'm a practicing Catholic, I at least do my Easter duty. I go to confession and receive communion worthily. And actually, it's even like just a simple thing. It's a simple thing we can do to help people. Just remind them of the Easter duty. It's the Easter season. Go to confession, go to communion. I mean, it's super easy. And I see that as an improvement over what was being described in the 1970s or what I saw as a student in the early 1990s. The second thing that St. Josemaria says, which I think we can never forget the value of acts of reparation. We can make St. Cyril of Jerusalem, when he speaks about Christ's death on the cross, there's a moment where he compares it to giving a crown to a king. But you're giving the crown to the king as a gift. And you want that gift to assuage the king, to persuade the king to let some rebels who have left the court, to let them back into the court. I think the image is helpful in a limited way, because St. Cyril also says, look, if you think about it, if you were to add rubies or sapphires or diamonds to that crown, it would make the crown even more pleasing to the king. And St. Cyril says, we, with our prayers, with our sacrifices, when we accept contradictions in life, we are putting we're putting things on the crown to make it more beautiful, to make it more pleasing. And so when we can make acts of reparation, not just for our own sins, but we can make acts of reparation for the sins of others. There's an actress that St. Josemaria, he was watching the news one night, and there was some actress that, some scandal had happened and her life had turned into a disaster. And someone watching the news with them said, poor God, right? Because God is being offended by these things. Sorry. The person said, poor woman, because the woman's life was a disaster. And St. Josemaria responded and said, poor God. And then he started making acts of reparation, right? But St. Josemaria was saying in that letter that these acts of reparation they can go a long way towards obtaining the grace of conversion for those who need it. Whether it's someone we personally know or something that we're aware of, or a person that we're aware of because of what's going on in the world, or a situation that we're aware of in the world. Acts of reparation go a long way in obtaining the mercy of God, obtaining grace for those people, for those circumstances.
That's beautiful. Yeah. That's Fatima as well. Fatima, Our Lady, was very clear on that. I liked how he said, "Poor God." That's it's just he did have a very the childlike spirituality, which is just at the end of the day, that's what it is. And the angel said, "Holy God," is being offended. Just the way he would speak to the kids to make reparation. That's all beautiful. I think that's all very practical as well for people, like a very practical response for what we're called to right now. I think we are in those times, and you can never measure these things. He does a lot with a little. He's not one of numbers, so that's great. Appreciate that, Father Jeff, as always. And like I said in the beginning, keep us in the prayers. Priests nowadays, we need a lot of prayers, and Father Jeff, for the I think we know where our thoughts come from when we can feel at ease. Like kind of just listening to this, it's good. It's good formation, and it's very helpful. I think it's and it needs to. Hopefully, please God, continue. So look, I think this was great. If you guys still have questions or whatever, just always put them up there. Feel free. And, we can always put them in there as far as even future topics or whatnot. You mentioned a couple things that I've written down here. Hopefully, maybe we can get for a future one. So thank you so much, Father Jeff. Maybe you can give us a blessing. And with that, we can say our goodbyes.
Sure. May the Lord be in your hearts and in your minds and on your lips. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Father. God bless you guys.